C.B. Cebulski. I'm the talent scout at Marvel Comics. I travel around to city looking for talent and do a lot of speaking on panels like this. So let me take a minute to introduce everybody here on the panel. I think there might be a few last-minute guests joining us after. Right here we have Mr. Arun Singh, who is Marvel's Director of Communications. Editor-in-Chief Axel Alonso. And the writer of Thor, Iron Man, and Fear itself, Mr. Matt Fraction. So this panel is really here to help you guys out. You all came for a reason, and you want to break into comics in some way, shape, or form. So what I like to do at the beginning is get a little bit of feel for the audience. So how many people here want to break in as a writer? Woo! All right, a lot of writers here. How about artists? How about specifically pencilers? Pencilers and/or pencilers, inkers, people who do their own art. Okay, wow, all right. So that's
who wants to be editor-in-chief?
Yeah.
Can't help it.
Who would it?
Your hand stayed down there.
Who would it?
A little too long.
And any colorists? All right, a couple. Oh, wow, all right, we got a good number. And how about anyone else? Any other discipline in comics, lettering or inking? All right, no, that's good. We're here to answer questions for everybody.
Editorial in general.
And next, how about editorial? People on the management end of comics. All right, so the people who can't write and draw like the guy, like me. And all right, cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to just tell you a little bit about breaking in. I always think it's good to learn by example. I'm going to have Matt, Axel, myself, and Arun tell you just about how we broke into comics. It was Mark Waid who once said that breaking into comics is like breaking out of jail. Once someone's done it, then that way is blocked, and you have to find another way in this case. You know, there's no real uniting, if you talk to anyone across the industry, there's no real uniting factor of how people broke in, except for really a love of comics, for wanting to be in this business, for willing to do whatever it takes to be someone who creates or works in the comic book medium. And as you hear the stories from these guys, I think you're going to see that that is the binding factor between all of us, too. So, Matt, did you want to start?
Sure. Well, I had an art school background, and that led to going to film school, and that led to kind of doing animation. But I had sort of, for a very long time, wanted to tell stories with words and pictures, regardless of the format. I was a lifelong comic reader and had worked retail and all that stuff. But in the sort of nascent days of the internet, as kind of comic book communities were developing for the first time online, I would kind of go to some and would post my work there. Not so much an effort to break in necessarily, but just because it was a place where creative people were meeting and sharing work, and I was a creative person, and that was my work. And it wasn't until I was actually in comics that I realized that had been doing me good, because I was meeting people online or then coming to shows. Like I said, I had worked retail and stuff, but I was meeting and fostering relationships where people were learning that I wasn't just the kid with a hand cart full of long boxes running back and forth from a booth, but rather somebody that was making work. So it was the animated work also was acting like writing samples, which again wasn't anything deliberate, but later I got a gig and it's like, oh yeah, well I've seen your shorts, I know you can write, so here, write a short story. And the short stories led to a graphic novel, and then suddenly I had printed material in my hands and thought, well, writing comics would be fun and it would be awesome to get paid for it. So I started to make it a point to, instead of just saying hey to people and giving them DVDs, like as I would normally do at shows or when I would see these folks, I would give them my work. And I came, here's a crafty writing tip number one, give your stuff to the people who can hire you. And the fact that you're now editor-in-chief blows my mind when I say this, but like every comic that I love from the 90s, you had edited. So I wasn't just blindly giving my books out to people, I was giving it to people like, well, I would like to work with you. I look at the books that you do, and they're books that I love, and they're books that I feel like I could live in that neighborhood aspirationally. But I gave you a copy of my first graphic novel, and that began it was like 2 years of basically kind of quietly pitching until you kind of gave me a gig almost.
Yeah, I mean, I read it, enjoyed it, and remembered it.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't like I could pull the trigger immediately.
Right.
I think shortly after I received, what is it called?
Last Independence.
Yeah. You did with Karen Dwyer. What's it?
Yeah.
that I loved it. Shortly after that, I'd gone to Marvel. It was a lot harder for me to pull the trigger on anything of your oeuvre, the kind of thing you were doing. But I remembered you, and
yeah, but you put me with your assistant at the time, who was Warren Simons, now a Valiant, and that was how I kind of got to learn the pitching process, and I kind of was over-eager. I would send in these massive pitches, not necessarily even for a massive series, but for a limited series. I could crank out a 10-page pitch, like marketing ideas and crazy shit like that. But kind of learning just the act of, I think I wrote a couple hundred pages that nobody but Warren ever saw, and it was how I learned to pitch and how I learned to speak to editors and stuff like that. So through kind of showing my work and persevering, one thing led to the other, and then just working hard.
Yeah, I mean, the detail was that we were planning an event called Civil War. Anybody remember that?
Oh, too well.
At the time, we were planning all of the spin-off series and the series that might launch out of it. And I was looking for writers, and to be honest, I couldn't find anyone. I thought, well, what about Matt Fraction?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember calling you and saying, okay, you're my guy, and I have no backup option.
That was exactly right.
Literally, yeah. I have no backup option.
And there's a New Yorker thing on the phone, especially the guys at Marvel. They go very, very fast, like it's out of a movie. You and Warren especially were always hilarious on the phone. Yeah. Look. I gotta do this. I'll talk to you later. Bye. But it was our call. Like, yeah. Look, I think you should read this book. You're my guy. I don't have a backup, so don't mess it up. You'll be fine. I'll tell you. Ed Brubaker, right? And you put me in touch with Ed. And Ed kind of broke me into, like, here's how you should write for these guys. And that was it. It was the weirdest. I sat there like, did I just get pranked? What was that?
Matt, you should tell him actually about that original pitch you had for Punisher. Is that with the different Punisher?
Oh, yeah.
That was a good story for them.
Yeah, that was, my dad served in Vietnam. And I remember calling you a couple of days into that process and saying that, my dad turned 60 this year, and I've never met a 60-year-old man I've been afraid of. So what if Frank dies or is incapacitated or just simply says I'm 60 years old and has to give it up, and out of Civil War comes a new Punisher? And for like a week, we workshopped that. We bounced it around and asked each other questions and kept kind of building it, and ultimately got to a point where it wasn't as good as if it was Frank. And so but I remember that put to rest all of my anxiety and concern and sort of contempt prior to investigation of the way Marvel worked, where I realized that if I could come to you with, okay, well, what if we killed him and introduced a new guy, or what if we put him away and introduced a new guy out of this, and it could be taken seriously, then it wasn't like a place where, at the time, my day job was like I worked in advertising, where like Coca-Cola will tell you what they want you to say. You don't get to really write for Coke or whomever. But that sort of was like, oh, look, this is a place where the idea will win, the best idea will win, and you can, we had a very serious week where this is, are we going to go forward with this? Is this going to be our take on it? Which was just encouraging and made me relax immediately about not being afraid to throw wrong ideas or wrong right now ideas out there.
Well, I think the important thing to see is it wasn't easy. Matt's at the pinnacle right now, but it's not like it happened overnight. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of persevering. I sometimes forget that when I think he's a spoiled little brat. But no, no. But the long and short of it is that Matt worked his ass off to get there, and he made financial sacrifices to get there. Yeah. And you did right. You wrote tons and tons of proposals that were workshopped before you finally had your shot. And quite frankly, had he blown it, then he might not have had a second, but he didn't. And I really didn't have the backup.
Well, and when I had the day job, I had the safety net of being able to say no, and I think that's a big thing. Is you get freelancer hungry and freelancer panic, and will say yes. Once someone says yes, you will say yes to anything that comes next. There is a compulsion where I wanted to say yes to every single thing. But I had a gig that was on some level creatively satisfying, and I was doing what I liked to do in small amounts, and so if I would get an offer and it wasn't something that I felt, I gave myself the one rule is that I would never write something I wouldn't buy. Now, it might not be good, I might blow it, I'm not saying it's all going to be good, but it would be the kind of book that I, as a comic reader, would I buy this? And if the answer was ever no, or, then I never did it, and I never have. So that was always my rule, but then when these offers would come through, I'm like, well, what about blah, blah, blah? If it wasn't a book that I knew that as a reader I wanted to read, or a reader that I wanted to check out, I would say no, and I was comfortable because I knew that I could still pay my bills and pay my mortgage and all that stuff. But